Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Konecktnow.com. My name is Kwei Akuete, and we're here today with Nderitu. She is a consultant with the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue. She's a former commissioner of the National Cohesion and Integration Commission here in Kenya, and she's a recent award winner of the Global Pluralism Award, the Jack P. Blaney Award for Dialogue, both in November 2017, and she was also awarded the Woman Peacemaker of the Year Award in 2012 by the Joan B. Kroc Institute. So we have a lot of great information to share with you here today, and Alice is going to take us through her journey about how she got into the field of mediation, what are some of the challenges and opportunities within this field, as well as some advice that she would like to share with people considering a career in the field of mediation. So let's begin. Thank you so much for joining us, Alice. Really appreciate it again. So I wanted to start off the interview by asking if you could tell us a little bit about your journey into the field of mediation, how you came to be in this work, and what are some of the highlights that you've had in the last few years?
My journey into mediation is a journey of coincidence. I hadn't planned for it. It happened. I used to work, I began with, I worked as a human rights education officer.
Okay.
And I spent a lot of time teaching people about, UN declarations, conventions, because at that time we had a constitution that was not, that didn't have rights, a Bill of Rights enshrined in it. So everything was up there, like everything was, we've signed on, we are signatory to the following at the UN level, at the African Union level, at those kind of levels. And I was always challenged in terms of, but how do you bring it down to us? So what does that really mean to us? How can we implement it? And people would tell me things like, hey, you came and taught us our rights, but the police still came and beat us up. And when we told them we knew our rights, they beat us even more. So
That's right.
yes. So it got to a point where I had to think about how to move people to another level. And I kept trying out different things. Then I heard about this course that was, like, one of my colleagues was taking a course. Oxford University had sponsored our organization, 2 people from our organization. I became one of those 2 people. And I did a long 17-month long course with Oxford University. Yes.
17 months.
17 months,
so
yeah. It
degree program.
Online and face-to-face and, all those kinds of things. But it was a course that linked conflict prevention and human rights.
Okay.
So a course that taught that, most of the issues that the causes of conflict are themselves human rights violations, and then you need to find a human rights solution. For the linkage became very clear for me.
Okay.
And I now started working on peace building approaches that didn't involve quoting UN declarations and conventions that were too far away from the reach of the ordinary person.
Okay.
So people could now make a connection in terms of, if I do the following, I can do the following. So we began having dialogues, bringing, for example, on board the policemen and the people they'd been beating up, and then the policemen were saying, this is what they would explain, for example, something like what was in the constitution on what is reasonable force, because the constitution then allowed them to use reasonable force. So they would explain and the villagers would ask them, what is reasonable force? What's reasonable for you is not reasonable for me. So we had very interesting conversations going on. So that then became full-time peace building, in the sense that we had violence here in Kenya in 2007, 2008. And then Kofi Annan came here to solve our issues. And then he created all these institutions to implement the agreement that he brokered. And I ended up becoming a commissioner in one of the commissions that was created as a result of Kofi Annan's peace agreement. And that commission was called the National Cohesion and Integration Commission. And that's where now I honed my skills in peace building. Because the country needed peace building at that particular time. And so then all that, then it made me a mediator. So when I talk about coincidences, that's what I mean, that I didn't plan on getting in there, that I got in first as a human rights officer, and then I became a peace building practitioner, and then from there I started mediating.
So when you're having these discussions about, conflict, there's invariably this aspect of power and who has the power and who doesn't. And how does that basically converge into a dialogue where you can actually get people to see the other side's perspective? How do you go about doing that?
Power comes in different dimensions, in different takes, because immediate armed conflict. For me, I look at the power dynamics in the sense of where the communities are at. Sometimes, like happened here in Nakuru, what I was looking for was who has something to protect.
Okay.
So, like the business people may be wealthy, they may have money, they may be not the ordinary person on the ground, but when violence happens, it's their properties that get destroyed. So then it made sense for them to come to the table.
Okay.
So they didn't have the monopoly of violence,
Okay.
but they had something to protect.
Okay.
So it became very important for them to sit at the table with the wealth that they have, to think about what to do with those with the monopoly of violence, how to help the youth who have the monopoly of violence, to then think like them, that we can solve things in a different way. Then something else that really helps is that in our field, there's something we call mutually hurting stalemates, where you look at both sides, whether they hurting, because in much of many of the conflicts that you see around the world, so much about it is ego. Nobody wants to give in first, so you need to find where they're hurting, like where is it,
where the pain points are.
Yes. And then tap into that to a point where people have to talk. It's painful because it's about how many people have died. Like people need to reach to a point where they feel like we can't lose any more people. Or our universities are now gone, our museums have been destroyed. So you get to that point of bringing people on board. So power is not usually what we see in normal functioning societies, where power is about who is sitting in an office, who is the governor, or who is the senator, that kind of thing. When there's violence, power is completely different. Like there's usually, for example, so much power also in the people who benefit from the violence. So, and those are also the people who end up becoming spoilers of peace agreements, because war economies thrive. You find people, money changers, people who launder money, and then people who are able to supply, say, phone airtime for some extra money when there's violence, because you can't get it anyway. So those kind of people they hold an incredible source of power that you have to diffuse in order for whatever you are doing at the peace table to be able to hold. To hold.
So you mentioned that conflict is usually because of the men, right?
Yes.
So in terms of education, in terms of socialization, what's being done to address maybe the pain points or the issues that men feel that they now need to take to the streets and act violently? What's being done to address those concerns?
Interestingly, although most key players in violence are men, including many of the people that I sit with are usually men, the people are immediate. It's so like the answer, in a sense, lies in the women. And I'll give you a story about this. I was in a team of 3, myself and 2 men, when I was at the National Cohesion and Integration Commission, and we were mediating in a place on the Kenya-Somali border. And one man, I was sitting in the meeting and I was chairing the meeting, and this man stood up and said, I would like to say that this violence would have ended if women were not so stupid. And
if women were not so stupid, what did he mean by that?
And I sat there and I had a moment of, wow, really? And I'm in the room and you're saying this? And then my immediate reaction was to call him out and ask him, like, did you just call women stupid? Is your mother stupid? Is your wife stupid? But then something like spoke to me and said, just calm down. So I let it go, and then we moved on to another point. But when we broke for tea, I asked him, why did you say that statement? And he told me, when we go out, like for example to raid, because we were talking about cattle raids, camel raids, cattle rustling, you know, that kind of thing. He said, when we go out to raid and we come back with the cows and the camels and everything, the women, they meet us and they are singing songs of praise. They have advanced intelligence on who fought the most and who did, and they compose a song for that particular person. And when you go home to your wife, soon she starts asking you, how come we've never sang a song for you? How come, like, haven't you done anything out there? Don't you know how to fight? Don't you know, you know? So he talked about that particular role, and it led me to the women. And I spoke to the women and they said, it's true. And they said, we realize that what we do is not nice. They didn't call it stupid. They said it's not nice. But then what is our choice? Because at the end of the day, the fighters are the role models in the community. So when you ask what is being done about it, like, there's a lot that's not being done. So much of that is about creating communities that have role models that are not necessarily warriors. We need role models, children to grow up seeing people around them who are pilots, who are lawyers, who are doctors, who are filmmakers.
Different backgrounds.
Yeah, they need to see those kind of people. Otherwise, they'll only aspire for what they see. And the women were telling me, when our boys are small, when you're bathing them, we tell them, you'll be a warrior. When you grow up, you'll be a warrior. You'll fight people. You'll fight for our ethnic community. You'll be great. And if they knew an alternative, then they would do something different. A lot of males suffer from what we call toxic masculinity, where you feel that you have to stand up for something, that you can back down, you can't lose a fight, and that alternatives to violence are not fashionable, that really you have to show strength and might, you know, and that kind of thing. And then the other thing is that in the space that I operate from, you often hear that war making is men's business. So why is peacemaking women's business? How can you, a woman, come in to help end a war that you didn't create? So even when I'm trying to bring women into the circles, into the dialogue circles that we have to talk about how to set up maybe a peace agreement between the communities, often the argument will be, why are you bringing the women in? When we planned for the war, they were not here. So bringing the women in, extremely important. Why? Because like we often say, like, nothing for us without us. And it applies to women, it applies to people with disabilities. Like, that era of people sitting in a room and making decisions on behalf of others
who aren't even in the room.
Yes, who are not in the room is no longer viable. And why is it not viable? Because if, for example, you are talking about ending violence, and you are sitting with the people who created the violence, and then you draw up a peace agreement, then the peace agreement is not just about this is how we started and this is how we'll end. It's also about creating sustainable structures, like through curriculums and teaching children how not to fight, how not to be violent. And how will that happen if the people you are talking about are not in the room? So always, peace agreements that succeed around the world rely on especially women, because of course they are more than 50% of the population, rely on especially the youth. Again, another even bigger demographic, more like 70% of the population, rely on civil society, all those people who are not included in the room.
So you mentioned that while some of the moms are bringing up their children and giving them a bath, and they're singing to them and telling them that they can be warriors in the future and that they'll fight for their communities and fight for those interests of the community, what are they telling their young girls as they're growing up?
They're telling the young girls, you'll get married to a warrior.
I see.
You will get married to a warrior, you will cook for him, you will take care of him, and then they begin teaching the young girls the songs. The songs, how to compose songs for warriors who come in, who've brought in camels and cows and like stolen from other people, because it's really theft. It used to be a cultural activity, but now it's no longer cultural because people have guns. In those days, people didn't have guns, and actually, like for many African communities, it was actually a sport. Yeah, you go, you take 10 cows from these guys. They'll come for their 10 cows. They'll try not to harm people. They'll make noise when they're coming in so that everybody runs away. I mean, it was a sport. But now people have AK-47s. They shoot each other. It's no longer a sport. So despite its cultural value, that it's gone to a space where it can no longer be something that people do.
Okay. In terms of mediation as a field, we often think, you mentioned Kofi Annan coming to Kenya to help mediate the problems that were happening in 2007, 2008, and he got a lot of flack for that after the fact. And then you hear about Jimmy Carter as he travels the world and mediating different situations. What is the role of women going forward in the mediation field, and how are women, especially young women, being brought into the field so that they can actually, have a seat at the table and help to mediate these conflicts and these issues that come up?
Unfortunately, we still don't have women in significant numbers at peace tables. And I got an award last year. I was awarded by the Global Pluralism Center and the Aga Khan. And the Global Pluralism Center is a partnership between the government of Canada and the Aga Khan, His Highness the Aga Khan. And the question you've asked, what I said I would do was that I would, using the award money that was given to me, that I would set up a pool, a team of women mediators across the continent. And I've been looking for them. It's taught me a lot. It's taught me that we have to demystify mediation. Mediation is not just what I do, like in Nigeria, like when I mediated between 29 ethnic communities and between 56 ethnic communities in Kaduna and Plateau states, and some work that we began to do in Benue. It was in Benue State. It's about things that we assume are everyday things that women do in the villages, to bring consensus between conflicting individuals or institutions or ethnic communities, and that we need to bring out these stories to show more women playing these roles, so that then it becomes accepted that women can actually sit in a room and do this kind of thing. And yet, incredibly, our community will accept a woman as a judge, Supreme Court judge. She will sit there and make judgments about their lives. But when it comes to, say, ethnic conflicts at the community level, then they begin to throw in this, oh, she wasn't there when we were planning the war, so how can she come in to do this? It's a field that has kept women out in a very, very strong way.
So part of that addresses the issue of credibility,
yes,
right? And access. So the men at the table, stereotypically, don't want the women there because they feel this is men's business, if you will. So how then do you get them, these men who are trying to safeguard this territory, how do you get them to make space at the table and deal with that lady who's coming in as an equal, who's just as smart, just as capable in terms of mediating this issue that's in front of them?
In Nigeria, we've worked with communities like the 29 ethnic communities. So many people had died. It had gotten in Kaduna and the 56 ethnic communities in Plateau State. So many people had died that it had gotten to the point of mutually hurting stalemate. So when we step in, they are so glad that there's somebody who is coming in to come and help end this. So then what then we do is give a condition to the communities. Okay, we are coming in and we are going to work with you to help set up a mediation. We are setting up a dialogue, an intercommunal dialogue, and we speak directly to ethnic communities. So we want each ethnic community to send the following number of people, 6. We usually ask for 6 people. So among the 6 people, like one will be representing the business community, another one will be a community, and then we have a respected opinion leader, which covers any of those categories. We have a youth, and then a woman.
Okay.
So we throw it in,
okay,
so that by the time they are coming to the table, they already have a woman representative.
Okay.
So the whole idea is to make them get used to having women. We are sitting with people who have been talking about this conflict for a very long time. They know all the angles, they know all the arguments. Then this woman comes in, she wasn't there when the violence was planned. She's not been part of previous peace talks. So she sits there and she doesn't even know how to engage. So it's a lot of work to teach her how to engage. And in time, I have learned to make clearer demands on the kind of woman who comes into the room. And usually I ask for a woman who is a professional within the community, in a profession that's already in a position of authority. So like, for example, a teacher, a lot of people go to teachers and they expect teachers to have opinions anyway, educated opinions. A nurse, and I usually tell the women, like, if you're a nurse and you tell the chief to take your medicine 3 times a day, he will take it. So they have authority and they have access, because when you're a nurse, anybody who is sick, anybody will come to you. If you're a doctor, so we look for those kind of people now, so that when she sits there, she comes with another authority. Because like for me, sitting in Nakuru, for example, here in Kenya, where I was the only woman, 100 men in an 18-month process. What gave me gravitas to sit in that room was because I was a commissioner.
Okay.
Being a commissioner became a greater factor than being a woman.
Okay.
So then they listened to me because I was a commissioner. But also for women, again, as I was talking about how much work we have to do in terms of getting the women to participate in a good way, or participate in an effective way. At the end of the day, I always tell the women, like all the women I work with, because on the side of the peace talks that we're having, we have groups of women. We have a steering committee of women that then organizes women. We have so many meetings with women, so many. We sit with them and we talk to them and we tell them, talk to your men, do this, that kind of thing. We carry them along. Nigerians call it carrying everyone along. And I always tell the women that when I'm sitting there as mediator, the key thing I tell myself is that I have to be the most informed person in that room. That I have to ask so many questions of so many people. I immerse myself in the community before we begin the dialogue itself. I'll visit the community, I'll be carrying my Kenyan tea, I'll give people the tea, and we will talk about who is fighting who.
Why do you think that's important?
What's important?
To get into the community before the dialogue starts.
It's extremely important to go to the communities and speak to everyone, because usually the way discussions around that discussions on a community's well-being, the way they're structured is that there are always some people who are considered those who speak on behalf of the community. And there would probably be wealthy people, there would probably be men, there would probably be professionals, people who have
a certain stature,
yes,
and standing in the
and
community.
Yet violence, mostly the people most affected by violence are people who don't fit into those categories. So like, for example, if you imagine when a war is going on, what's happening to the people with disabilities, who can't run away or who can't crawl away, the poorest of the poor, extremely poor, who have nowhere to run to. They can't get into you don't even have a bank account. They can't even get into a car and run away. And then you have people whose opinions are never sought, and women fall into that category a lot. I have perspectives that the people in the room, though they may come from the place, though it's their violence, it's their conflict, I have opinions that they do not have.
Okay.
Every conflict has a root cause. And then somebody who plays on that root cause to ignite violence. So that, like, for example, if land is the root cause of the violence, people fighting over land, that there'll be somebody, usually in many cases a politician, seeking to get political mileage, who will come and ignite the land issue, or bring out all those narratives of hate passed on from generations on community, from one community to the other, and then get them to fight. You
had mentioned basically a politician who has something to gain in terms of votes or some type of standing leverage in the community will come in and raise this issue of land, let's say, to get people to start fighting, right? So how does that fit into now the discussion about hate speech and fomenting violence? How are those issues now addressed? Because they're seen as, somebody was standing in the community, but often they get away with, fomenting the violence that they've created. So how is that being addressed?
Hate speech is a very, very powerful component of that incitement to violence by politicians and other people, religious leaders. Usually it's somebody with the clout to change opinions who when he voices these kind of issues that become very, very powerful. And like, I was very lucky to have worked with a commission, the National Cohesion Integration Commission in Kenya, that is also tasked with working on hate speech. I was very lucky because we were able to implement a very powerful, for the first time, law on hate speech in this country, in Kenya. And we were able to put people in the dock. It was not easy. I've documented it. There were people we knew, so it was very difficult. But we needed to say something. We needed to do something because we just come from a horrible violence in 2007, 2008. And part of that had been caused by hate speech. So we needed to do something. So actually things are working, like, say, I would say for Kenya in terms of hate speech. In other parts of Africa that have worked in not so well, people are very averse to hate speech laws. People fight them. People say they will be used for witch hunting, and the wrong people will be put in jail and all that. We can have, for hate speech. But bottom line is we can't do without hate speech laws. I don't think we can.
So those people who are pushing back against these hate speech laws, how then will these things be addressed in those contexts?
We need to change a whole paradigm in terms of how we do our politics. We have, and I'm talking about the continent now, except for Ghana and Tanzania, you'll find that other parts of the continent, you'll find people mobilizing on the basis of ethnicity, and that they haven't figured out another way to mobilize for votes except on the basis of ethnicity. And doing so means mobilizing on painting a picture of we versus they, the other. And the other always is, that brings in, of course, the hate speech in terms of, because when you're describing the other, you're not saying nice things about them.
Right.
Yes, you're bringing in all this ethnic bigotry and saying all these horrible things and putting out all these stereotypes and, and biases against other ethnic communities.
How does education today either hinder or help these types of issues? I know you've written a book on Beyond Ethnicism. I think I've gotten that correct. Is that going to be, brought into other communities as well, other than Kenya, so that people can start discussing these issues of ethnicity and violence?
The book Beyond Ethnicism actually, by the way, is the correct word to describe what many people call tribalism.
Right.
So I use ethnic communities instead of tribe, and I use ethnicism instead of tribalism. And Beyond Ethnicism is in Kenya's curriculum. It's in the Kenyan curriculum for teachers. It basically speaks to a question a teacher asked me, which was, how do we look at a child who is 10 years old, 11 years old in my class, who is already exhibiting signs of becoming an ethnicist, who already is being biased and playing out all these stereotypes against other children in the class? How do I stop that from morphing into, say, a warlord in the future? So that's what it speaks to. So it speaks to how you move from biases, stereotypes, to actual discrimination, and how powerful that becomes if you actually have power, if you're sitting in a position of authority, how if you have biases and stereotypes, how easy it is to be ethnicist and racist as well, because the principles of ethnicism and racism are the same.
Okay. How is ethnicism being addressed? I mean, is it going through other NGO groups? Is it going through the media? How are people being sensitized to these issues from an ethnicity point of view?
The National Cohesion and Integration Commission, like, it's charged to directly work on ethnic and race relations in this country, in Kenya. There's no other country in Africa that has that kind of body. In South Africa, they had a body that was dealing with race relations, but not ethnic relations.
Okay.
So Kenya is a first in terms of trying to deal with ethnic relations. In Malaysia too has a Cohesion and Integration Commission to deal with race relations. Australia too has, Ireland too has, you know, countries that have had difficulties in the past between societies. But there's so much work to be done.
Okay.
Yeah, it's so much work to be done.
So what do you see as some of the challenges and opportunities that await somebody in this field of mediation?
The absence of role models, and the absence of a safety net to catch you when you fall, and the absence of people to speak to. Like, it's virtually impossible to do the kind of work that I do as a mediator without somebody to speak to, like a sounding board, like to say, hey, I'm doing this, because the pressure is immense. You have no idea the pressure. A lot of people feel that being in a mediation, you're just sitting there and, or you're like a judge, you know, you're writing what people are saying and then you'll give a judgment. But it's not the same, because you're sitting in this room and people outside are getting killed. And a lot of people feel you have the power to stop the killings happening outside. The rule of law has broken down, because for you to even be mediating armed conflict, it means the rule of law has broken down. The pressure is immense. It's immense. You're managing a team, like the team that is sitting there with you. You're managing the communities, what they say out there. You have to make sure that there's no press release, you have to stop them from speaking. You have to manage all these rumors. You're also managing the politicians, because their utterances can completely mess. They can undo everything you've done with one utterance. It's so challenging. Right. Yeah, I always wonder why I do it when I'm in there.
Okay.
But the satisfaction of a peace agreement, as communities keep saying that, when it's so impactful on people's lives. You meet people who are able to tell you, schools stay open, hospitals have medicine because of what you did. It's really powerful.
Okay. So given all that and the challenges and opportunities and the safety concerns that some might have about this field, what advice would you give, especially to a young woman who's considering a career in the mediation field?
Mediation it's not easy, as I'd said earlier, and it's so key to be always the most prepared person in the room. You have to read. You have to read everything you can find on the particular conflict you're dealing with. You have to immerse yourself with the people. You have to, like for me, I conform. When you get in there, if people are wearing headscarves, wear a headscarf. Don't try to stand out. I always say that I want people to remember what I said, not what I was wearing. So whatever is needed of you to do for the people to accept you, do it. Because for the communities to accept you as their mediator is really the core foundation of anything that you are out there to do. If they don't accept you, then you're not a mediator. You have to be accepted. They have to trust you, and you have to really work hard at getting them to trust you.
Right.
And really, that's the core of it.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Alice, and thank you for joining us at Konecktnow.com. See you soon.